Part of my daily routine now is to check my email. I've been encouraging students to email anytime they have questions or anything on their mind. And quite frankly, I love getting emails and reading through them and trying to be helpful. So in the last video at the end, I invited you to email me at jmartin2@livoniacsd.org and share with me your understanding of Paulo Coelho's Four Obstacles philosophy. And I hope a few of you took me up on it. In watching back that last video, I noticed something, and what I noticed is a little bit of an opportunity for a vocabulary lesson. I misspoke a little bit. So there was a word, actually two different words. The words were impetus and stimulus, used in Paulo Coelho's introduction to The Alchemist. And both impetus and stimulus mean a moving force, something that pushes somebody forward. I misspoke and said that the word impetus means an obstacle, and I actually was thinking of the word impediment. And my hope is that misspeaking in that way didn't screw up your understanding of Coelho's second obstacle. Basically, that second obstacle is Coelho mentioning that a lot of times people think that love is an obstacle. You know, people who love them, maybe an example that comes to my mind is a lot of our students, when they graduate from Livonia, they want to go out of state to go to college, but they're afraid to do that. And they're afraid to do that because they don't want to leave their family, and they're worried that if they move really far away from their parents and their siblings and their, other loved ones, that it would make their loved ones sad. So they think of love as an obstacle of them, to them achieving or doing what they really want to do to make them happy. But Coelho suggests that love is never an impediment. If it's true love, it's an impetus or it's a stimulus. Love is something that pushes you forward toward your dreams. So again, my apologies for misspeaking there in that last video. I hoped to read both the introduction and the prologue to The Alchemist in the last video, but ran out of time in the video. So I want to wrap up by reading to you the prologue. And before I do that, I want to give you a couple of things to think about as the prologue is being read. I want you to note the way that the story feels. One of the things that people often say about the book, The Alchemist, is it just feels different. It feels different from anything they've ever read before. And I think that right here, even in the prologue, you'll start to see that this book does have a different feel to it. So please note the way that the story feels as we start reading it. And then the second thing I want you to notice is that the prologue is a retelling of the myth of Narcissus. Some of you might be familiar with that myth already. It involves a young man looking at his reflection in a body of water. So this is a retelling of this myth, the myth of Narcissus, but the myth has been changed. And a lot of people that have read this book before, after reading the prologue, they ask themselves, why would the author change the myth like that? What would be the purpose of changing the myth? So right now, I'm not saying you have to necessarily answer the question, why has the myth been changed? But I at least want you to notice that the telling of the myth is different than the actual myth would be, say, if you picked up a book of, mythology and were to read it. So again, this is the prologue from Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist, the version that we have in our classroom back at school. And if you have a copy of the book, it begins on Roman numeral IX. Here goes. Prologue, translated by Clifford E. Landers. The Alchemist picked up a book that someone in the caravan had brought. Leafing through the pages, he found a story about Narcissus. The alchemist, like many of you might know as well, the alchemist knew the legend of Narcissus, a youth who knelt daily beside a lake to contemplate his own beauty. He was so fascinated by himself that, one morning, he fell into the lake and drowned. At the spot where he fell, a flower was born, which was called the Narcissus. But this was not how the author of the book ended the story. He said that when Narcissus died, the goddesses of the forest appeared and found the lake, which had been fresh water, transformed into a lake of salty tears. "Why do you weep?" the goddesses asked. "I weep for Narcissus," the lake replied. "Ah, it is no surprise that you weep for Narcissus," they said. "For though we always pursued him in the forest, you alone could contemplate his beauty close at hand." "But was Narcissus beautiful?" the lake asked. Who better than you to know that? The goddesses said in wonder. After all, it was by your banks that he knelt each day to contemplate himself. The lake was silent for some time. Finally, the lake, said, I weep for Narcissus, but I never noticed that Narcissus was beautiful. I weep because each time he knelt beside my banks, I could see in the depths of his eyes my own beauty reflected. What a lovely story, the alchemist thought. And that concludes the reading for this week from The Alchemist. That there is the end of the prologue.